Hello, listeners. David Newton here. I hope you are having as much fun listening to the program as I am producing content for it each and every week. Although this is a free podcast for all of our listeners, contributions from supporters really help me to keep this going. To show your support, please visit roostertailtalk.com and locate the support tab. Every contribution helps this podcast to continue to bring you more hydroplane news, interviews, and history. Now, enjoy the show. Roostertail Talk, a podcast dedicated to everything related to the sport we all love, hydroplane racing. I'm your host, David Newton, and it's time once again, so sit back, relax, and welcome to Roostertail Talk. It is June 2nd, 2020, and this is episode 37, part 2 of my interview with Dave Villwock. In continuation of our conversation last week, I talk about different hull designs with Dave and the possibilities of the evolution of the sport. We talk about favorite memories in his racing career, the Bud years, and maybe a few other surprises. I know you're big into designs and the next step for evolution of hydroplanes and to find more stability with speed and all that. So I know you're a really big proponent of the two-wing design, especially your time with Circus, having that 2 or 3-wing built there, and then your first Unlimited ride, your first race in Unlimited was in the 2-wing, which you won with the Coors Dry. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about what, with that 2-wing design, why didn't it really take off in the sport more? I know there was a couple of hulls built, but it didn't really last for too long.
Well, without getting overly technical, the problem, we were looking at, going back in that, back then, we were looking at, how can we get the boat to lift off the water stall and come back down? That's what Ron's line of thought was. Now, Ron's dad, Ted Jones, he had a completely different opinion on, what a boat bottom needed to look like, because I had the opportunity when I was down working for Ron Jones Marine, doing some things for him, that Ted would walk in and he'd have a few comments about, what designs look like, which I thought was really interesting to listen to two different lines of thought. Mm-hmm. But we were working on, we wanted to put smaller wings and higher angle of attack in the hopes is it would rise off the water, lose ground effect, and come back down. That was a good idea. In practice, though, what we didn't understand was how much the boats yawed, in other words, skidded sideways. Mm-hmm. And how much of the air would be cut off to that ram wing, as the thing goes through a corner, particularly a place like in Detroit that you'll turn like 45 degrees, going around that corner, or Madison. So a boat in those positions it's going to close off a lot of air. Then it becomes hydraulic, and then it starts to react against itself. So that was one of the problems. The other problem was we didn't really understand that how much water went, due to the yaw, how much water went through the center of the boat. So every time we got the boat outside of a big, course like San Diego, every time we got it onto a course that had a tight turn, every time we ran really well, we'd come back and part of the boat would be missing. Budweiser suffered the same problem with their 2-wing boat.
Yeah.
And we'd started with a 3-wing boat, and we didn't really run into those problems with that, but we didn't really have that. Next year would have been the development of that boat that would have been bumped into a few more problems we didn't understand yet. So then you couple that with, like Glenn Davis's boat, his canard boat, that really taught me a lesson. The day that happens, the day I just sort of slapped my forehead and said, oh, I get it now. So even if you had a boat that's pitch stable, like Glenn's boat was, and you got to see in practice what happens. If you take 4,000 to 7,000 pounds, and it's just a physics lesson, you take something that weighs 4,000 to 7,000 pounds, and you throw it in one direction, either by a propeller or push it, or I don't care how you do it. but you get it going in a direction at 180 miles an hour, and it bounces off of something and goes up. Even if it's pitch stable, before it's going to stall and come back down, it's going to go a long ways.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened with Glenn's boat. It just went up and then finally stalled. But trouble is, he was 40 feet in the air when it went straight down.
Yeah.
So that's the day that I says, just forget about that, because we're better off to blow the boat over and keep the guy closer to the water. We'll accelerate better, because both of them are going to be a crash. We're just talking about what kind of crash.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the history of it. We had ideas of what to do, but it just, probably because of yaw more than anything. Secondly, the shape of the sponsons, of how the sponsons were shaped, that became a problem. I can tell a story about one guy that used to work on the circus team. He was talking about, Lucero came up to him and said, I don't understand why that old boat still runs better than the new boat. The new boat was wider. It should, had the same bottom angle and all of that. Well, the guy in the circus crew was with me the day that we changed the deck shape of that boat, and how we cut it and how we put the radiuses on it and all of that. And the guy was a sheet metal worker, so he understood that very well. And he turned around, and it was at San Diego when Lucero said that. And all the boat bows that were on the same trailer at about the same angle, if you ever look at them, they're all lined up. And so if you stand about 6 feet up, 7 feet up, and look down the pit row, you'll see that all the sponsons look about the same. And so back then, everybody had just regular sponsons except for that boat. Regular Ron Jones sponson. A lot of them had a radius, but they hadn't changed the deck line.
Yeah.
And so he pointed at Lucero and says, look, you can see it right there. You can see the nose of that boat was about 6-8 inches lower than all the rest of them. He goes, that's why. But everybody had copied something, but they hadn't really learned it wasn't just the radius, it was an overall shape.
Well, do you think if there was more money to do R&D and see more development with that, do you think there are better ideas on hull design out there, or do you think it's kind of at its pinnacle right now?
Well, we could probably learn some more. We learned just about everything we needed to know at circus. But at Budweiser, we learned more about why things. We learned more about yaw. Mm-hmm. We looked more about shape, and that's why the boats are shaped differently on the side. And, we at circus, we were looking at, we had looked at yaw, but mostly I was looking, in a straight line, because we didn't perceive how much yaw the boats were going through. At Budweiser, we spent a lot of time working with that. That's where you saw the fences and deck shapes on the right side of the boat and all that stuff change. And everybody's going to copy that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, just because the molds are there and they buy the parts from them and stuff like that. You could probably develop some more shapes, I'm not sure, that would be a development thing, but the boats are pretty well developed, over the last 20 years. Of course, when I came up with the shapes I did, everybody at the time thought everything else was totally developed, Yeah. So if somebody had enough money and had the right mindset, they probably could discover something, but they'd have to try. Like every time somebody looks at a cowling design, I sort of chuckle. I've screwed up every possible cowling design. I made all kinds of different cowling designs, and they all sucked. So literally,
yeah.
But somebody could probably come up with something if they had enough money and enough time to do it. It'd be nice to have some, people have developed some engines. It'd be nice if you could get an engine that was a low enough cost that was a piston engine.
Yeah. I
don't see it happening, but if somebody wanted to do something, that'd be cool. But trouble is, in today's environment, as soon as you made something really cool and really fast, they'd outlaw it. Back, when I started, when somebody came out with a new idea, everybody just emulated. They didn't try to figure out how to outlaw it.
Right.
In today's environment, in racing, practically, it's not just boats. in auto racing and everything, anything that's new and inventive that nets a big gain, somebody figures out a way to outlaw it.
Yeah.
So then it really diminishes that unlimited mindset and that creative mindset. For anybody involved in the sport, it's just what's going to happen.
Yeah.
In today.
Yeah, that is too bad. Because I know one thing that was really unique about like the '80s, I can think of in particular, is how how many different power plants were out there, and all of the different things that were being tried and allowed to be tried. Because you think there's probably, I don't know, maybe even 6 engines that were tried, and probably even more than that, and that were used. So it's too bad. It's too bad.
Yeah, and like I said, I was looking at back during the hydroprop era when the turbine was being so restricted. We were looking at putting together a Griffin. But the problem is we knew that as sure as we developed a new boat with a Griffin in it, they would outlaw it immediately. So it was something fun to think about and to put on a drawing board to figure out if we knew how to do it. The answer is we knew how to do it, but what would the result be?
Yeah.
So you have to think about those things in a pragmatic way.
So there was serious talk about, or somewhat serious talk about, running a Griffin 20-ish years ago with Budweiser.
Yeah, that was, and that's why one of the reasons we're supportive with Ed Cooper's boat. That was kind of part of that thinking. Although they designed their own boat and did all their own thing, but we were looking at what would it have to look like, and how could we apply what we've done in the turbines to a piston boat and make it successful, and the boat's all of that.
Yeah.
You took and added some serious money with Ed's program, you'd see some interesting results.
Yeah. Oh man, that would have been something to see.
Yeah. I remember that one day. I think we were racing it with Fred's thing, and Jack Berry had a Griffin in something, I forget where. I remember it was at Hawaii, and I'd never been around the pit area when the Griffins were running, and it was there where I couldn't really see the course, and somebody came around, and man, the wrenches were rattling off the tables, and I'm going like, what in the heck was that thing? Of course, it didn't make it very far, but God, it was sure impressive.
All right. Well, I want to play a game of favorites. I've got some different things I want to ask you. I just want you to just share what your favorite one thing of that category would be. So just kind of first to mind, but what the favorite one is of that. So out of all the race victories that you've had in your career, which was your favorite race win?
Oh, I think probably for Fred, because you had to put it in context. We had surprised Bernie with something that in the rest of the fleet, really, Bernie and Woomer, the big matriarchs with Winston and Budweiser, and here we are, Fred Leland, and Fred had called me and asked me if I wanted to come work on his boat, and I did, because I was out of work, and so I went up there and says, well, and Fred wasn't afraid to work, Fred was another guy like me that, I may not have a lot of money, and that's what I grew up in racing. I didn't have a lot of money, but I wasn't afraid to work. I could build my own engine. I could build my own boat. As long as I had enough time, I could make anything happen. And Fred was that way. And so when I went out there and says, well, geez, we need to lighten this thing up by 100 pounds. We need to build a skid fin that looks like this, and a bracket that looks like that, and a rudder bracket that looks like that. And we'll push the motor way back in this thing, and the gearbox needs to have a different shaft and an input package, and we need to be able to change gear ratios. And Fred goes, okay, it just goes to work, Well, and like I said, I think I said something online the other day. I'll never forget. I had stepped out of Fred's boat, and I think it was Evansville, and we just out-qualified Budweiser with it, and we didn't have any money at all, and I stepped there, and I was just, a little intimidated. Bernie was right there and on the same dock, and I'm walking by and just trying not to, make any trouble, you know. And I was standing there doing something with the boat, and I could hear Bernie talk to Ron Brown. It says, "Ronnie, you want to just tell me how they out-qualified us with no money?" You know, and boy, I had to bite my tongue to get off the dock, you know. And another time, a year or two later, you know, John Reinberger, who it was a great friend and crew guy at the Budweiser, and we were having a good year. We'd won practically everything that year with the Pico boat in '96, you know, leading up, and I think it was Kansas City or Texas or something like that. And Mark Evans was driving Fred's rock boat, and Mark Evans was the Chip was driving the Budweiser, and Evans goes out and he beats the Budweiser. Well, meanwhile, you had to figure out the crew on the rock boat was. It looked like one guy he's wearing a captain's hat, a Levi jacket with the arms cut off. Another guy's in a tank top and a bandana. Another guy's in bib overalls, you know. And Reinberger's he's walking by me at the dock, and I'm sort of grinning, you know, because I went, man, I can't believe that just happened, you know. And Reinberger comes by and he looks me square in the eye. He goes, "Just friggin' great. We just got beat by the village people." And I never laughed so hard, you know. So when, you know, in '94, Fred had not won anything. And this is a guy that you have to remember. Fred, when I was racing limited boats, I'd call up Fred because he had a milling machine in his living room of his huge brick house. He built a Carrollson 5-liter at that time, which is a national mod now. And, you know, he had a Bridgeport sitting in his living room, you know, so I'd go in, knock on Fred's door and said, "Hey, can I machine some pistons?" "Sure, there's a machine over there. There's the fixture," you know. And so that history goes back of watching Fred go from just a hard worker at everything. And he wanted to do well at turbines, and he had really the right stuff to do it, and the right equipment to do it.
Yeah.
A little like Stockland does now. I mean, Stockland's got more equipment than anybody. He has more equipment out here in terms of how to build things and where to build things and the equipment to build things than Budweiser does or did. So Fred had that, you know. So if you just worked hard enough, and if you had good people, you could do exemplary things. And something that happens in racing that's unique, I think, is you would see a guy like Chip, for instance, would go to a particular team, and all of a sudden some of the people that used to work with him showed up. And the same thing happened to me when I showed up at Fred's, and I'm working there for a while, and then, you know, next thing I know, Danny Walters calls up and says, "Hey, what's going on out there?" And I says, "Well, we're changing a bunch of stuff. I think it'll be successful." I said, "The motor stuff is actually okay. The gearbox stuff needs to be changed a little bit, but it's going to be okay. I think it'll be fast." You know, so he comes out and he gets, you know, and he talks a little bit, and then next thing you know, Fred needs a truck driver, and so next thing you know, Danny's on board. Shortly after that, Ron Horning, the guy his nickname's Bub, you know, guy that worked on the circus crew, he comes out and says, "Well, you need some help?" You know, you know, and so he you know, helps on that team and did that. Another guy by the name of Scott Erickson. So next thing you know, you had a pretty talented group of people. And I've always said that. I says, it's not, and I'll tell you another story about Budweiser after this.
Yeah.
So we had this group of people, and we're racing, and we got the boat pretty fast. It's suffering some problems. The steering had never gone that fast before. And so we had to rebuild some of that. And then we got it going. We finally got most of that fixed by Tri-Cities, and we're racing 10-hour hard. You know, I remember him saying one time, he came up to me on the dock, says, "Why do you race me so hard?" And I says, "Because I can, Chip. That's why." You know, and because he hadn't had somebody run him every lap, you know, for a long time.
Yeah.
And, you know, and that's what we did. And anyway, what happened was that I forget what heat it was as a final, but we poked a hole in the spots, and we were running it hard enough now that it poked a hole in the spots, and it tore the right sponson up.
Oh,
so that's 4 days before Seattle, right? So we pick everything up. We head back to the shop. We put one guy in an airplane so he can start laying up a sponson. Danny and I and the rest of the crew build a new sponson, put it on the boat. And oh, by the way, we went to a slow pitch game and got most valuable players at the slow pitch game against the NHRA. Even though we'd been up for 3 nights straight. We'd had like an hour nap each night.
Yeah.
You know? And so that whole weekend unfolds. Danny and I get it all done. And we load up the truck and we drive down to Seattle. We parked the boat in the pits. And this was, we had made, I forget it was the second day of qualifying or the first day, I can't remember. But we make it to the pits about 5 in the morning. It's just getting daylight. Danny sleeps in the truck. We flip for who got to sleep in the truck. Danny won, so he gets slept in the truck. I slept on the trailer. And that was the beginning of that weekend. And the week before that weekend. Mm-hmm. So we go out there and we go, well, you know, we're just going to, you know, take our best swing at this again and see what happens. And so we go out there and we manage to get a better run at the first heat. And Budweiser and Hanauer and Tate are busy racing each other. Well, they'd forgotten about me. And I happened to got a run on them and got on the outside and held them in a lane and got around them. And at that time, you got lane choice all day. Well, we went and ran the table. And I'll never forget Fred that day. Fred came in and says, "What lane are you going to choose?" And I says, "Lane 2. And he goes, "You choose lane 2 and I'll fire you." I says, "Well, okay, but I'm still going to choose lane 2. And so we chose lane 2 and we won the race. And, you know, for Fred, I mean, that was just, you know, something that he had only dreamed about.
Yeah.
You know, him and Jackie. You know, it's just something that just was never going to happen. And you know, it wasn't like he did it. It wasn't like he backed into it somehow. You know, he had managed to beat the best guys of the best guys with the best teams with the most money. You know, it just couldn't have been a better script.
Yeah.
You know, we won some races for Circus that we felt that, you know, we were slaying the dragon and you know, but it wasn't quite to that degree, you know. You know, there's also races for, you know, like when they came back to race after I got injured, you know, it's like a lot of people, oh, he can't do, you know, he's not going to be able to steer that boat, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, we'll just win 8 races then. You know, then we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, just prove it on the water, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, did you ever have a favorite radio guy?
Yeah, Danny, of course, Danny Walters was. Danny and I did the radios with Chip, and we had developed a way to communicate. And a radio guy's different back then. And most of the radio guys now are more like timekeepers. Mm-hmm. They're telling the driver where to turn, where to go in here, where to go out there, to get there on time with a speed limit and whatnot. And we still had a speed limit back then, but they're playing a little different game. So the radio guy now is more of a timekeeper, and if you listen to the radios, you'll see they're telling him, you need to cut here, you need to be over there, you know, where Chip didn't have any, you know, we weren't telling Chip how to drive the boat. You know, Danny and I, we had an approach as to how to use words and to get a lot of direction out of not many words. So Danny would take half the course and I would take the other when Chip was driving. And so we wouldn't overlap. And we had a list of commands that told Chip what to do with a word. Because you have to remember, back then, radios didn't work worth a damn either. You know? Yeah. So you might hear about half a word. So if you tried to tell somebody a sentence back then, you might as well be speaking Greek, because the driver wasn't going to be able to understand the dead spots in between words as to what you were trying to tell him. Mm-hmm. So you had to just give him commands, you know, like we would say inside 1, inside 2, inside 3. We're telling him exactly where to move the boat, and Chip could do that. And Danny could do the same thing for me. Lauren Sari was another great radio guy. Did it differently. Mm-hmm. You know, he did all of the same things that Danny did. And I, you know, asked for some things to be put into place so that, you know, what I was used to saying and hearing didn't change. That would be, and Lauren did that very, very well. And Lauren added another, I used to call Lauren, he was the voice of conservatism, and he did it in a great way. And I give you an example. We made the start in Detroit, flying down the front straightaway, going around the turn, exiting the turn, getting ready to take over control of the race. And Lauren would come on the radio and say, you might want to pay attention. You just went through there at like 50 miles an hour. Roller's got to be like 2 feet. And so that was great information that you go, oh yeah, don't be stupid. And Lauren would pick, lanes to go through. He'd get, and he had some place that he would go, that he would be telling you, go through in lane 1, come in lane 1, go out in lane 3. Go, he would direct traffic so that you just didn't make the stupid mistakes by running into a wave or spinning the boat out or breaking the boat too, or all of those things that, and a radio guy's a pretty valuable guy. In terms of running an overall race team, radio guy is in control of just as much equipment as the driver is. If the radio guy makes a bad decision that turns out to blow the boat over or to flood a $100,000 turbine engine with boat parts or water, well, that's within his capability to do it. Right next to that, of course, the driver, he can screw up all the same things that the radio guy can. And I was just telling the guy that was working on the propellers, because I did that at Circus, I said, the guy back here, and I'd always tell that to him, I said, you're in charge of making sure the propellers are not cracked and the shafts are not cracked and making sure that there's no dings in anything that's going to come apart and all of that. But think it further. You're the only guy that comes up here. When the boat comes in, you turn the propeller over. You're in control of that engine because you're listening to the engine to see if it has a scrape or a bind or anything. You're listening to the gearbox to see, does it turn over normally, or is it got some bind, or is it turn over harder than it did before? So I'd always tell the propeller guy, you got your hands on about $500,000 worth of stuff too, so be careful. You're in control of more than you think.
Right. Well, did you ever have a favorite boat that you raced?
Oh, geez, I don't, like Fred's old boat, we did both the two boats that we ran there, we called it Old Lucky, because we got lucky with that boat a few times. That was a great boat. The boats we built for Budweiser were, they were these works of art that they're still racing today, some 20-some years later. Yeah. Right? They're still racing today. I mean, that's a testament to how good of equipment it really was. Still's the state-of-the-art design. And back when we were running those boats, I mean, we had them tuned up like I remember that, we were running at Madison and we had, the flight controls tuned perfectly and the balance of the boat perfectly. Where I could come off the corner and the crew liked it because I'd stand the boat up about 3 inches up off the water and just run it down the whole straightaway and set it back down and go to the turn. They go, oh, that's so cool. Like Mike Campbell said, that's just the coolest thing I've ever seen. Yeah. Because you could see that it was a control thing, that we're picking it up and you could watch the canard because you're close to it there at Madison. You can see me pick it up and run it down the straightaway, control it, stall it there and run it down the straightaway, not touching the water for like 15 seconds, then set it down and turn, go around turn, so the boats that were that finely tuned were, something to see. And then of course the Elstrom boat was, kind of the same thing. It had a few things different, but, it took care of me in a lot of ways. I crashed it a few times. It hit me a few times, but it was a great boat that did a lot of things that, people didn't think were possible.
What was your favorite class to have raced?
Well, it's turned in, the super stock and the flat bottom racing got me going. And had I not had the people around that to teach me as much as I learned, I couldn't have been successful at all the other classes. So I have to say that's one of the favorites. Although I will say, like the first time I watched when we're racing flat bottoms, there was some chatter on about that here this last week. A guy named Mike Eckert was trying to run this boat called the U-Bet.
Okay.
And the poor guy, he'd show up every weekend, and he'd go out and run about a lap or two, and he'd blow up his engine. And it was basically the same as a super stock engine, the stock 7-liter engine at the time. And I had watched that happen for a couple of weeks, and finally I went over, because I felt sorry for him. The guy looked like he had, enough dollars to do things right. Mm-hmm. And I said, hey, Mike, if you need some help on that engine, I'll put you an engine together, And so I took all of his busted parts and I put them back together and made an engine that ran. And then he'd asked me to drive it. They ended up winning the Grand Prix at and the 7-liter class at Lake Sammamish, one of the last races of the year, I think. And I remember when I got in that boat and drove it the first time for him, that I went, wow, I really like this. I'd be really good with these great big boats, because it was first time I'd driven a boat that was 24 feet long,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I just remember that thought. I went, I'd be good at these. So turned out it worked out well for me.
I would say so. What was your favorite race site to have gone to?
Oh, geez. I mean, Seattle is all the fanfare, and it's because the fans is there, and everybody lives here, so that's the great place to win, but my favorite race course really was Evansville.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is
Evansville,
that?
I was sad to see that one go.
Oh,
I mean, I like the people there. I like the venue. I like the race course. I forget how many times I won there. It was a really nice race course, a nice place to race.
Yeah.
Tri-Cities and San Diego, they're great because, they were fun because they're big racetracks, and it's fun to go run a boat at its potential, to run a boat really fast. That's fun, but Evansville was, because it was a different shaped course and whatnot, it was unique.
Yeah, it had that dog leg on the front stretch. That was very unique on the no other
side. I think
so.
they had the Blue Angels there one year. It was there, but that was kind of their nemesis. They got into a fight over the air show guys and the boat race guys, and that didn't end well.
Out of all the seasons you raced in Unlimiteds, which was your favorite? I think I know the.
I think a couple of them. I think winning as a crew chief when we won the championship for Circus, that was first, and then when we won, in '96 with Fred and with Pico, they were a great group of people that put a lot into that boat.
Yeah.
Pico was a really. A bunch of smart guys at Pico. Those are the guys that really helped us into the modern era of dynoing engines and transmissions and stuff that make our cars run, 300,000 miles now instead of, 50,000 miles. So, that was a fun year too.
Well, that was a very magical year for you in '96. I want to ask this question. In all different kinds of sporting events, there's different roles that the people play, right? And Unlimiteds are no different. A lot of drivers over the years have played kind of that villain role, whether it's self-selected or given to them by the media or whatnot. And for several years, you were kind of portrayed in this light. I don't really take that as a bad thing. I think that's kind of also a sign of respect in some ways, because you're going to, the organizations want the one person that's at the top of their game to kind of play that role, because you're always, trying to slug the best of the business, right? I'm just curious, did you ever have fun with this role? Thinking over the years, like, I know Bill Muncey would play this up from time to time, but what was your take on that whole role in your career?
Well, like you said, Muncey had anybody that's been very, very successful will be put in that light. Mm-hmm. And Bill Muncey was put in that same light. He was, cast with the guy that had, the best equipment and the best engines and the best everything. And so that was always the excuse as to why he won. But the truth is, Bill Muncey would win in anything, and then he got, something that I experienced as a child. I mean, I was like, I think 10 years old. And I saw Bill Muncey was going to race at Lake Sammamish. He had his 225 hydroplane there that was, I think it was an old coal cock hull or something. Mm-hmm. And, so it wasn't the fanciest piece of equipment. The engine wasn't very polished, but he'd still go out and win, And so for that, he would be rewarded with extra special attention, that he would be scrutinized more than the average guy. So that particular day, Bill had come into the pit area, and they did their normal thing when the boats come in, that they inspect all the boats, inspect the equipment. And part of that was inspecting the driver's safety equipment, his helmet and his life jacket. Well, Bill had his orange helmet that had some different shades of blue and Bill on it. Maybe it said Bill Muncie, I can't remember. Okay. But he had his name on it, and he had a few pinstripes on it. Well, the race officials had told him that, no, that helmet didn't qualify as a totally orange helmet. And so he had to get a different one. Okay. And I didn't know all that when I walked up. I just saw him. He was sitting there, just sort of sitting on the park bench there at Lake Sammamish at Alexander's Park. And you could just tell he was kind of down, And I went up to him. I said, Mr. Muncie, how are you? How you doing? My name's Dave, and my uncle races in your class. I says, what I think I just said, it looks like you're having a down day. What's the problem, as a kid would say, And he goes, well, he said, it appears they have a problem with my helmet. It has pinstriping on it. And I didn't understand that time. Really. I went, he said, you're supposed to have an orange helmet, and mine isn't completely orange, so I'm going to have to go find another one. I said, okay, well, my uncle has one. I told him, and he goes, okay, well, I think I can find one, he says. And off he went. But I understood that. I got context at a very early age of what a guy that's in the top position is going to be under more scrutiny than the average guy.
Right.
And so you have to know that comes with the territory. And so, when I was racing Fred's boat, I was the guy that was, that people cheered for. But then when you got into the Budweiser equipment, well, now they cheered for a while, but, because they saw, the average guy made good. But then as you start winning and stacking up wins, well, then they don't like you anymore. Then they start stacking a few rules against it and other things. And if you're frustrated with that and vocal, then, they'll use that against you. Yeah. And so that's just what happens. It's just part of, as one guy said, it's always windy on top. It's just how it works.
Yeah, it is.
Whether you climb a mountain or make it to the top of any sport, it's going to be windy on top.
Well, I'm glad you can laugh about it. Thinking back on that now, just over the years, I was thinking about this the other day. I've seen a lot of like fan made like buttons and different things. One I was particularly fond of is called Darth Vader or Darth Villwock, and you had a kind of like a skid fin, like instead of the lightsaber. I was just wondering if you had any favorites that you saw over the years, or anything like slogans or whatever that made you chuckle.
Yeah, I've seen a bunch of them. They're probably pretty cool. I can't remember which ones they are. I would look at them, and people have all kinds of things. One of the guys that was on the circus team, Bub, Ron Horning.
Oh yeah.
He'd make up his own. He'd make up his own buttons, and he'd always have something that's interesting. Like he sponsored Fred Boats one time, so he'd have his own button. So, there's a lot of cool ones out there. These race teams are fickle. It's people that, people tend to follow each other around. And I told you I'd tell you a Budweiser story.
Oh, yes, please do.
I think it was the first or second year that I raced for Budweiser. I had to go to their annual convention. You'd stand up and wave at the crowd, and, it was quite an experience because, you got, tens of thousands of people there in a big auditorium or stadium, depending on which venue it was. But the first one I went to, was at a big convention center, and he had a lot of duties as the Budweiser driver. He had to go pour beer for people and go visit different groups and say hi and speak before different groups. And so we're doing all that. In my first year, I'm just thinking, I just want to get in here and out of here without screwing up somewhere.
Yeah.
Causing a problem somewhere that I don't understand. So I'm being real careful. I make it through the whole convention. it's just about time to go. I'm looking at my watch. There's like a half hour to go. And the Tony Paterno, who was the vice president of marketing, and Mike, I can't remember Mike's last name, that was the head of the Budweiser brand, came by, and as I'm kind of sticking to the side of the stadium there, trying to stay out of trouble and wait my time out, they come up and says, "Hi, Dave, could we talk to you for a minute?" And I thought, man, what have I done now? You know? Yeah. And I'm thinking that, and I said, "Sure, what can I do for you?" And they says, "Well, we got a room over here." And I thought, it's not getting any better. That's what I'm thinking to myself, it's getting worse, not better. So they go in the room, and they says, "Well, Dave, first of all, I want to thank you. You've turned our Budweiser team around. The boat's very important to us. And, you've managed to win us another championship. We really appreciate that." Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, but there's going to be a but, I'm thinking. They says, "But what we came here to talk to you about was we want to be successful on our NASCAR team. And we just don't seem to be able to do that. And because you've been a team manager, and you're a driver and a team manager, and you've been team manager at other places in your sport, in motorsport, that you've played that role. We want to be successful in NASCAR racing, and we've taken, because they were with Hendrick Motorsports at the time, mm-hmm. and they said, we've taken Jeff Gordon's car, who was winning everything at the time, and we've repainted the car, and we've taken his engine that won the week before and rebuilt the engine, but still, we're still not, up front, mm-hmm. like we want to be. What can we do that would be different?" And I says, "Well, you just told me what the difference, I says, racing isn't about the equipment. It's important to have equipment, but it's all about the people. And can the driver communicate with the people? Can he tell them what he needs? Does he have a relationship with the people? There's trust involved." Mm-hmm. And I said, that's the important thing. And I kind of told him a few stories about some of the people that I'd raced with, like I just told you, mm-hmm. Earlier. And I said, so look for a driver that has a team that he's raced with for a while, coming up through different forms of racing, and can bring his own people with him. That's important. Mm-hmm. It's just as important as the equipment, if not more. Mm-hmm. And they go, "Okay, well, who do you think's a good guy?" Well, through this time frame, I was at Daytona, and through T. Wayne of Winston, he was a big boat fan, and when I happened to be walking into the pit area there at Daytona, I went down to watch the race. Mm-hmm. He came over and says, "Dave, how you doing?" He says, and he talked and says, "You need anything, so on and so on." No, I was fine. Budweiser had set me up with anything I wanted. And he goes, "I want you." Dale Earnhardt's a good friend of mine. He says, "I want you to come over here." And Dale and I became friends, mm-hmm. and he was telling me about what he'd done with what was the beginnings of DEI at the time, okay. and that he was putting it together. He was taking all the crew members that were kind of burnt out from running 30 races from Childress Racing and putting them to work in the shop so they could build cars for all the kids. Dale Jr. and Kerry and Jerry and his daughter, they all wanted to race cars. And so he put all the crew members that were tired of traveling, they'd rotate them out so that they'd work in Dale's shop. Mm-hmm. And so he's telling me all about that. And so I started watching Dale's races, on cable at the time. Yeah. And so I'm watching them. And so then when Budweiser says, "Well, who do you think is a good guy to look at?" And I says, "Well," "I know a guy's got a pretty good name." And he's got the best equipment and support from, Childress Racing, mm-hmm. So I don't know. I'm no car guy, but I said, what they have is they have a whole building full of, 5, 6, and 7-time Winston Cup champions, mm-hmm. And the aid of the Childress engine program and aerodynamics program with Chevrolet. I said, that'd be a pretty good pick for me. I said, "Okay, well, thanks, Dave." Well, I walk away from that. I don't think I said much, other than just kind of pointed him in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Called Dale and told him, "Hey, you might get a call from Budweiser. I don't know. So just know that I recommended you. So about 2 days later, I get a call in Tukwila there.
Yeah.
It's August Bush the 3rd, not the 4th, not the marketing guy, not it's August Bush the 3rd.
Wow.
He calls me up, and I happen to pick up the phone. It's in the afternoon. I picked it up. I said, "Hi, hydroplanes," and he goes, "Is this Dave?" I said, "Yeah, August Bush the 3rd. So I just wanted to call you and let you know we hired your guy." I thought, crap, how did it get to be my guy? But it turned out it worked out. So
yeah, man.
that was good.
That's funny. I never heard that story before. Just thinking back about your career, you had several crashes in your career, some worse than others, but I'm always curious about, in the driver's mindset, how were you able to come back after those crashes? So I know it takes a special individual to not let it affect your psyche. Because I know it's in the past it has affected a lot of drivers where they can't return, right? But you were able to.
Well, for me, everybody, when I hurt my hand and when I crashed at Budweiser that time, we knew what we were getting into. We built that boat. We knew the design problems, but we didn't know that we knew at that time how to make all the controls work. We ended up, we did, but we had to build a boat because Budweiser wasn't doing well at the time, and they were having trouble with they copied really the design, or they finally got on the mindset that we did in 1988, and they built a boat that was a better boat. But over the year, they were having troubles keeping it together. It broke Spons's office off it a few times, and the capsule wasn't very good, and it had come off 2 or 3 times, and they were having trouble in that development stage. And that's always, like, a good friend of mine at machine shop once told me, he says, "You can always tell the pioneers in any one endeavor. Those are the guys that are face down in the mud when the rest of the wagon train goes by." And that's about right. And that's what Budweiser had suffered that year. They were fighting something new and learning how. And so Bernie wanted to build something that was like the Pico boat, so we did. And we learned more through that year. But that's the problem with that design-wise with that boat was, if you hit a big enough wave and hit it twice, it's going to, because of the cockpit location and a full spar and all of that stuff in it, it's going to get upside down, and it did.
Yeah.
So we knew all that going in. We had designed the canopy better for a rear entry than we thought was necessary. We thought we'd actually overdone it. We built a part on the back of that thing. We thought you could run over a Kenworth. But I did one thing that saved my life. And that's what I said, let's put a bulkhead right here. So in case that we get run into from the back and it crumples all this stuff, but the boat still crashes from the back, that bulkhead will fold back and push the water away from the driver. And I'll be darned if that wasn't the one thing, when that back crumpled,
yeah,
and that one honeycomb panel, because we know that honeycomb is a little more resilient than composite. Composite, when it blows up, it just explodes when it reaches its limit. Aluminum just bends. It doesn't explode the same way as composites do. And so when the composites exploded, that panel, that bulkhead, saw that water, and just like we talked about, it folded back at 45 degrees. It hit me in the very back of the helmet and took the helmet off when the water hit it, but it blew that canopy lid off there like you said, put a hand grenade inside that capsule. Yeah. And so we knew what we'd done, and we fixed it after that. And currently, the capsules that we're running today are, the product of that accident, which is a good thing. If I had to sacrifice a couple of fingers so that a whole bunch of other people could live, well, that's a better bargain. And a lot of people were telling me after that, hey, because there's, in that kind of situation, it was heavily insured, so you could become a rich guy by doing nothing at all. You could get paid, a huge sum of money weekly for years to come. And, but I just felt that I had something more to do. Didn't know what it was, but I thought that I had something more to do. So I just set my mind that I was going to go do that. And so, I worked hard at, I didn't have I only had one finger working the first couple of years. it was only the third year that I had two fingers working on the right hand. And, went through, I think, 28 surgeries and all of that to get back to one piece. And so I just decided that was something to do. And because, like I said, I'm vested into, these boats, I always vested myself into it, that if the boat crashed, well, it was just as much the driver's fault as anybody else, So there's no reason not to get back in.
Okay.
And so that stuff never really bothered me.
Wow. I think it's part of your character to keep going, because I know a lot of people throughout of those years involved with crashes that they can't handle it, right? So it takes a strong person to do that. It does.
Yeah, well, I heard John Force one time says, "I've been on fire from here to Australia." I think you've heard that interview probably.
Oh yeah.
And I thought about this when he said that. I just had to laugh. I says, "Yeah, I've been on fire from Lawrence Lake to Doha. I've been on fire along in a lot of places. I've been upside down, crashed more times than I can imagine or ever believed possible." But I was, one of the things that I hold some pride in is, along with Ron Jones, I learned a lot about what safety was to become, and helped in that process. And, had a lot to do with the design of the capsules that we're running right now.
Yeah.
And although none of them are ever perfect, but, we learn every time that we crash something. Yeah. But, overall, it's worked out. It's worth it.
Okay. Well, I know you've been helping out Kelly down at Bucket List Racing with his new endeavor here and there. I was just curious if you could comment on what you've been doing with the team there and how things are going with their new acquisition.
Well, they had it's a boat that's really very similar to the T5, T6 boats. It has some of the things from T5 in it, some of the things from T6 in it. Boat's good. It's at the proper weight. It's at fighting weight.
Okay.
He had to, we did some things at the Budweiser boats that a lot of people kind of overlooked, but we rotated the gearboxes and moved the engine so it was in the center.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a difficult thing to do, because it's moving. That gearbox is a V drive with an offset, and as you roll those things around, the angles become very complex. It's a difficult thing to change into. Okay. And to do it that way. But, so I am helping him, and we've got all that done. Got the engine reinstalled. That will be a much better boat as a result in it. And, it won't be difficult to make if the motor runs well, the boat will be pretty darn fast, because it's built off of the original plans that I drew in 1996. So it's not going to be hard to make that fast if the motor runs well. Okay. And Kelly can build his own propellers, so it looks good. Okay. I mean, both Kelly and I are kind of those guys that none of us ever had a lot of money in racing. Mm-hmm. We're always doing something we had to do ourselves in the flat bottom racing, and just imagine, anybody's been to a junkyard and you go look in the junkyard and there's that old dog that's patrolling the perimeter, and he's got a chunk of ear missing. He's blind in one eye, kind of walks with a limp, that dog. Oh yeah. But you just know you cross that line, it's going to be a fight. And you may beat that old dog, but it's going to be a fight.
Well, you mentioned that you guys haven't really had much money in boat racing. I don't think many people have, right? It's not a place to go to make a lot of money, right?
No. Like I said, Butch Corney, the circus team, I forget, we'd blown up some engine. I think it was the Gold Cup that we'd put the engine in. We had the Gold Cup in San Diego, and Chip was driving the circus boat. We put the motor in, and everything's all set. We go out there, we light the motor 15 minutes before the race. No oil pressure. Everybody looks around, we go, what now? What do we do now? I said, we haven't got a choice. We're going to blow the engine up. we got to change the motor whether we make it or not. So we change the motor. We get the motor in there. We get it in time. It's in the water. He goes out, run. Chief gets the inside. He's making her up the inside. Motor blows a hot end. Second motor blows a hot end going halfway to the first turn. Just past the start line. Butch Corning turns around, he looks at me, he goes, "Fire me, I'm too stupid to quit."
Well, is there any chance we'll see you in the driver's seat of the Bucket List Racing's new acquisition?
Well, I don't know what they're going to do as far as, they got to find sponsorship and, try to pay for things. So, that will probably bring a driver, but I will certainly get in the thing. I said, if I'm working on something, I'm not afraid to get in it. Okay. So we'll see what happens. Okay. Well,
it'd be exciting if you make it out there again.
Fire me, I'm too stupid to quit. A lot of people would agree with you.
Yep. Well, just thinking back, last thing I want to talk to you about is thinking back on your career with all your teams and as a driver, as a champ, getting championships, the 10 Gold Cup victories you have, 67 unlimited race wins, which is most of all time. No one else has more wins than you. What are you most proud of in your career?
Over the whole thing, and I said this a long time ago, they said, what do you want to be known as? And I says, I just want to be known as the hardest racer that was there. Mm-hmm. And I think John Love, the guy that used to be a promotion guy for Chip, and he was for me too, and he was for Roger Penske. Mm-hmm. He came in the truck one day, and there was some sort of bad press about this or that, and we're at the Gold Cup. John comes in there, he said, just remember, this ain't no popularity contest, it's a race. Go win the race.
Was there anything you wish you would have accomplished in your time?
No, what more could a guy hope for?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been able to do the things that people only dream about in double digits. How many people get to do that? How many people get to win? I think I won 10 times in Seattle, I'm not sure. But
you won a lot.
A lot of times in Seattle.
Yep.
And all those, storied places. We won a whole bunch of times, Mm-hmm. But I think Elstrom, we won the Gold Cup 5 or 6 years in a row. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's hard to put a run together like that. But I wouldn't be anything if it wasn't for the people, that's for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dave, for being on the show with us. It was great talking with you.
Well, happy to be involved. Thank you.
Well, hopefully this summer will bring us some racing and some more fun times ahead of us.
If not, well, maybe we ought to just see if we can't get a street race going. If they won't let us run an event,
there you go.
We'll have to start the world of outlaws of hydroplanes, I guess.
Well, maybe we can bring back the towing on your bikes, right? Just make some little ones and we get on some bikes and.
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah. We could go to Green Lake and still do that.
Yeah. There we go. One way or another, we'll be racing around a lake. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our episode. Make sure you come back next week to listen to our next episode. We release new episodes every Tuesday at 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your podcast player, as well as rate and review your experience. For more updates on Hydro News, check us out on social media. We're on the major players, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Roostertail Talk is also online with our website, www.roostertailtalk.com. On the website, you can sign up for an email subscription list to get notifications on upcoming episodes, Hydro News, podcast updates, and much, much more. Finally, this is a free podcast to all of our listeners. And if you're really enjoying your experience and want to help us to continue to grow and expand, please donate. You can find a link to donate through PayPal on our website through the support tab. So until next time, I hope to see you at the races.